Well, this is my third try at this. This is video number 2, and we're going to be looking at sight reading today. I was trying to show you my very handsome face, but I can't figure out how to flip the camera when it's actually videotaping, so you're going to be stuck looking at just this piece of music paper. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a quick review of the landmarks. I know a lot of you have been through this before, but it never hurts to refresh a little bit. Then we're going to learn how to build a template if you don't know already. If you do, it'll be a good review. Okay, so let's start off with the basics. The G clef, or the treble clef, and the F clef, or the bass clef. So the G clef tells us where G is. It's the second line up from the bottom of the treble clef, and it's the G above middle C on the piano. The bass clef tells us where F is. The two dots are on either side of the F. It is the F below middle C. Middle C itself looks the same for both treble and bass clef. It's just written close to one or the other. High C is 2 spaces from the top line of the treble clef. Low C, 2 spaces from the bottom line of the bass clef. The top line of the G clef is the F above high C. The bottom line of the F clef is G. It is the G below low C. 2 ledger lines. A ledger line extends the staff beyond the 5 lines and spaces that are given. 2 ledger lines above the top line is double high C. 2 ledger lines below is double low C. Okay, those are your landmarks. Those are your reference points for reading all the other notes that are going to come up in a composition. So the next thing we're going to talk about are intervals. Composers tend to think in chords, and chords are made up of thirds. And thirds are odd numbers. So we're going to look at how music graphically expresses thirds. If you go from a space to a space, or a line to a line, you've got a third, okay? This means that you are skipping over a key, in this case, a line. You're skipping over the B, and in this case, you're skipping over the A. So if you know this note is high C, you don't have to think about this note. If you know this note is G, you don't have to think about this note. You can merely react to that skip over a key. If I have notes a space apart, I have a third. If I have notes 2 spaces or 2 lines apart, I have a fifth. 3 spaces, 3 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, and 5 spaces. We have a 7th and a 9th respectively. Same goes for lines. Okay. Now we're going to go over to ledger lines. Everyone complains about reading ledger lines, but it really isn't so bad if you focus on your landmark double high C or double low C. Because obviously, if this is C, then this is a skip above C, E, or a skip below C, A. This, once again, if this is C, this is a skip above and a skip below. Okay, so reference point that those 2 ledger line notes, and you should be fine. Ha, 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 ha. Okay, our third level are chords. When a chord is either line, 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 or space, 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 it's in root position, meaning that the name of the chord is the bottom note the most. This is a G chord. This is a C chord. So whenever I see line, 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 or space, 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 I know I'm dealing with a root position chord. If I know any one of these notes, or any one of these notes, and I have a landmark here and a landmark here, I don't have to think about the rest of them. Now, when we start inverting chords, should really be looking at this to make sure that, okay. When we start inverting chords, we start running into fourths. If the fourth is on top, it's a first inversion chord. My G chord becomes, okay. Same thing works for spaces. If I start here with my E, I'm going to get a line. There's my fourth, there's my third. Okay? This is the second. I dropped it an octave so we wouldn't get into larger line things. So now I have flipped my chord twice. The fifth is on the bottom. That would be graphically represented here. Oh, we're doing a C chord. So we would have the G, right? And the C, and the E. Here's my fourth, here's my third. Okay. When we count up seventh chords, we're just extending the line, 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 space, space, space. Paradigm. But when I move out of my root position, seventh chord, I'm going to start getting seconds. The root of the chord will always be the top note of the second. So in this case, I'm dealing with a G7 chord. In this case, I'm dealing with a C7 chord. Why the B flat? Okay, because the C7 chord is not being built in the key of C, which has no sharps or flats. It's being built in the key 5 steps below it, which is F. And if you don't know it, the scale of F has a B flat. So when I build my C chord in the key of F, it comes out with a B flat. This always gives us a minor seventh and a dominant seventh chord. Which, especially in versions, gives us a nice smooth transition to the 1 chord. 5, 7, C7 to 1. All right, so we've covered all that. Once again, as I've always said, the thing that has to dominate all of this is the ear. Let's see, I got this. After this is all in. All right. It's a little piece by Bach, which I'm sure you all know. It's hard to get my hand around the tripod for that low G. But there you go. Now, let's look at this piece. First of all, we're going to identify the landmarks. Okay, we have a landmark G here. We have a landmark C here. Well, that does us fine for the left hand, the right hand. But what are we going to do about finding our way around in the left hand? Well, if we remember that this is our landmark F, then we know that this is obviously the note above F, and we have a root position chord. This piece has 1 sharp in the key signature. If we go to the last chord of the piece, we see it's G. So we can be pretty safe in assuming this piece is in G and not E minor, the relative minor. All right, so we're only going to look at the first half of this piece for time constraints. But we'll work on other pieces individually. All right, so we've got our landmarks. To work with, some G's, a C. This is a skip above, but we're going to have another way of approaching that. So you can see, in at least for the treble clef, in each measure, we have at least one landmark, usually multiple ones, to work off of. Let's do the left hand. Once again, if we use our F, we can pick up, this is a G chord going backwards. This is a skip below F. The landmarks on the left hand are kind of skimpy because we're in the key of G. There's our F, which in this case is sharped. We'll talk about that when we talk about chords. And there's a landmark, there's a landmark, there's a landmark. Okay. All right, now that takes care of our landmarks. Now we're going to talk about intervals. If we look at our very first interval, we see that we have line, line, line. It's a fifth. You have 5 fingers. So if you put that fifth finger, the thumb on G, that fifth finger is going to end up on D. So all of this is in the first, is in 5-finger position for the first one. In the left hand, you've got a G chord. Okay, we'll talk about that. But the space, space, space. Now let's look at the entire entire first line for the left hand. He's just outlining a G pentachord. Okay. And if we go on the right hand, here's our landmark C. Here we have a space to a line over a large distance. It's going to be an even number. That's an octave. When you see a line going to a space over this sort of distance, you know you're dealing with an octave. And there are a lot of octaves. So our landmark C, this is all stepwise. I'm sorry. Okay, here we come to a skip. Everything up to that point is skip, skip, otherwise it's all stepwise. Skip, stepwise, octave. Skip, step, 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 skip, step. Okay, so we're doing skips and steps. Music can only move in 3 possible ways. Stepwise, skips, and the same note over and over. All right, now let's talk about our chords. This piece is in the key of G, so we're going to just do a quick analysis and then build a template. Our first chord is a G chord, okay? Now we could get in a little more complicated, but we're just going to leave it at that. This is all within the G chord provenance. Then we go to a C chord. Back to our G chord. Now we have, it's not there, but we have a D7 chord. We're going to talk about what all these chords are. G chord, G, now here we have a D chord. Back to our G chord, which is going to have a completely different function because we're cadencing here on D. So the G chord now becomes the 4 chord of the D and gives us what we call a plagal cadence. We'll talk more about that another time. All right, then we're back to, inverted that a little, but we'll go with it. This is all G, back to our C. This is our C chord. extend that to there. Our D7 chord, G chord, D7, a little G, a little D, and cadencing back in our home key of G. All right, so let's do a little adding up. We have a G chord. This is our 1 chord. We have a C chord. This is our 4 chord. Back to our G chord, then we have our D7 chord, our 5-7, and that's pretty much the whole enchilada. We have 3 chords to keep track of, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 measures of music, 3 chords. Now, most pieces are more complicated than this, but to start with, this is pretty good for a sight reading. So let's just go through it very slowly, and we're going to leave out the ornaments. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to go through it, watching the video and putting your hands on top of the keys without making any sound. You can watch me playing it and listen. Then I want you to play it on top of the keys again without looking at the video, just looking at the score. And I'll leave this up for a while so you can see it. So you're playing on top of the key, so you're not making any sounds. Occasional bump is okay. But you're hearing it in your head, okay? This is really important because we always work from the ear to the page, not from the page to the ear. This is essentially what sight reading is all about. It's building up a template. In this case, there's only 3 chords in the template. But if we extended the idea of the template for G in a more complex piece, we would have our G chord. We would have our 4 chord C. We would have our 5-7 chord. We would have our 2 chord. The reason we would have our 2 chord, and we did use it that way in this piece, is because the 2 chord well, we didn't use it because we had a plagal cadence. Now, the C could either be sharp or not, because it could be either. Usually when you modulate, if you want a stronger effect, you'll make this 2 chord a major chord instead of a minor chord, which it is normally, to put a little more punch into it. So that you would sharp the 3rd. All right, so we have these 4 chords in our template. What else could we possibly encounter in a longer, more complicated piece? Well, we might have a secondary dominant, a tertiary dominant, A, C, E, A, B, C sharp, D, E. We could have an E, which is your 3 chord. Oh, we're in the key of G. I'm sorry, it's your 6 chord. And once again, it could be major or minor, depending on the composer's, what flavor the composer's trying to get across. So now we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chord template. In a longer piece, the composer will also go often to the relative minor, which in this case is E minor. Which would be our 6th chord. A quick way of finding the relative minor is, instead of going up 6 like they teach you in theory textbooks, is to go down 3 half steps. I'm going to try and do this with the piano on the tripod. If I'm on G and I go down 1, 2, 3 half steps, I get the relative minor. If I were in G, let's say I'm in the key of E, and I take the 6th of E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I get C. That's the wrong answer, because in the key of E, you have a C sharp. But if I go backwards from E, I get C sharp if I go down 3 half steps. So you'll never be wrong if you do the 3 half steps trick. So now my E chord, my E minor chord, is going to require its own 5 chord. Probably a 5/7. So that would be a B, D sharp, F sharp, A. The reason for the D sharp, there is no D sharp in the key of E minor. E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. The D sharp comes in from the harmonic minor, which raises the 7th of E, which is the note before E, which is D, raises that to D sharp. We have the F sharp from the key signature of E minor, as well as G. So this is our relative minor. So now we've expanded our template of chords from 3 to 5 to 7. If we familiarize ourselves before starting a piece with these 7 chords and are comfortable with them and their inversions, then this is probably pretty much what you're going to find in the piece. Anything you find outside of this is something that you can deal with because you have these down. Okay, so, you know, I do the thing with the gorilla. So if you have 10 chairs in a room and you change them all around but keep them in the same configuration of a circle, you're going to notice there's any difference. No, because the chairs are all the same. But if there's a gorilla sitting there, you're going to notice that it's a gorilla. So you don't have to focus on the chairs, you just have to focus on the gorillas. All right, so anyway, that should be enough for this particular session. If you have any questions, get in touch with me, and we'll go forward from here. Thanks.